Welcome. What you are about to watch is not science fiction, and it is not folklore. It is a serious investigation into one of history's most compelling unresolved questions: the mystery of the Anasazi, North America's greatest mystery disappearance. Across the world, in universities, research institutes, and field excavations, serious scholars are wrestling with evidence that does not fit the accepted story. Evidence that has been documented, measured, and peer-reviewed, and that still has no satisfying conventional explanation. We are going to look at that evidence carefully, without prejudice in either direction, not dismissing what is extraordinary, but not accepting it without scrutiny either. The truth, as always, is in the details. They built cities in cliff faces and on mesa tops. They engineered irrigation systems in one of the driest landscapes in North America. They created pottery of extraordinary artistry, tracked the movements of the sun and moon with architectural precision, and constructed roads across hundreds of kilometers of desert. For nearly 2,000 years, the people archaeologists call the Ancestral Puebloans, once known by the Navajo word Anasazi, meaning ancient enemies, dominated the Four Corners region of the American Southwest. Then, around 1300 AD, they left. In a period of perhaps a few decades, the great cliff dwellings at Mesa Verde, the ceremonial complex at Chaco Canyon, and hundreds of smaller sites across the Colorado Plateau were abandoned. The people dispersed southward and eastward, merging into the Pueblo peoples whose descendants live in New Mexico and Arizona today. What drove one of North America's most sophisticated cultures to abandon everything they had spent a millennium building? This is where our investigation begins. Stay with us, because the further we go into the evidence, the more extraordinary it becomes. The story you think you know is only the surface. Beneath it lies something far more remarkable. Let us begin. Before we examine the specific evidence, we need to step back and understand the context. This case does not exist in isolation. It sits within the broader phenomenon of lost civilizations, and to properly evaluate what we are looking at, we need to understand the broader picture that surrounds it. What separates a civilization from a collection of villages? Not technology alone, but organization. The capacity to coordinate thousands of people toward shared goals, to store and transmit knowledge across generations, to build institutions that outlast individuals. These are the hallmarks archaeologists look for when they define a civilization, and for most of the 20th century, the oldest examples they could identify dated to around 3500 BC in Mesopotamia and Egypt. But that benchmark has been steadily eroding. Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, discovered in the 1990s and excavated since, consists of massive stone circles with elaborately carved pillars depicting animals, abstract symbols, and human figures. It dates to at least 10,000 BC, roughly 6,000 years before Stonehenge, and older than the invention of pottery or agriculture in the conventional sequence. Someone built it. Someone organized the quarrying, transport, and precise placement of limestone pillars weighing up to 20 tons. Someone knew what they were building and why. That level of coordinated effort implies a society more complex than any model of 10,000 BC predicted. Göbekli Tepe is not alone. Every few years, a new site expands the timeline further. Ancient stone structures in Indonesia have been dated to 25,000 years ago. Complex astronomical alignments have been found at sites in Africa predating Egypt by millennia. The human story is older, richer, and more turbulent than the standard narrative allows. When we look at lost civilizations, we are not chasing fantasy. We are attempting to recover chapters of a history far longer than any currently recognized textbook will tell. This context matters because it tells us something important. What we are about to investigate is not an isolated curiosity. It is part of a pattern that researchers in multiple fields have been independently documenting for decades. And patterns in science demand explanation. With that foundation in place, let us now turn to the specific case at hand. Now we reach the heart of the matter, the core evidence surrounding the Anasazi. North America's greatest mystery disappearance is more extensive, more verified, and more troubling for conventional explanations than most people realize. Let us walk through it systematically, fact by fact, and allow the evidence to speak for itself. We are not going to speculate here. Every point that follows is documented in peer-reviewed publications, official archaeological records, or government archives that are publicly accessible. The question is not whether these facts are real. The question is what they mean. Consider this first extraordinary detail. Chaco Canyon in northwestern New Mexico was the ceremonial and trade center of Ancestral Puebloan civilization, containing 12 major great houses, including Pueblo Bonito, a D-shaped structure of 650 rooms and 4 stories that was the largest building in North America until the 1880s. Chaco was connected to outlier communities across 60,000 square miles by a network of engineered roads up to 9 meters wide. This single data point, if taken in isolation, might be set aside. Anomalies happen, instruments malfunction, researchers make mistakes. But as we continue, you will see that this is not an isolated anomaly. It is part of a consistent and documented pattern. But that is only the beginning. Researchers also discovered the great houses at Chaco Canyon incorporate precise astronomical alignments. Doorways and windows frame the rising and setting sun on solstices and equinoxes, and a spiral petroglyph on a cliff face functions as a solar calendar that marks the solstices and equinoxes with a dagger of light falling precisely on the spiral's center. Now, a skeptic might propose an alternative explanation for this, and that is entirely reasonable. We should always test alternative explanations before accepting extraordinary ones. The problem is that the alternative explanations, when examined carefully, create more problems than they solve. The mystery deepens when we examine tree ring data from construction. Timbers recovered at Chaco Canyon sites show that the region experienced a prolonged drought beginning in the 1130s that lasted for approximately 50 years, the most severe drought in the region in 1000 years, occurring precisely when the decline of Chaco culture began. This is where the conventional account begins to strain. Each individual fact might be dismissed or minimized in isolation, but the cumulative weight of the evidence is another matter entirely. Perhaps most remarkable of all, evidence of violence and possible cannibalism has been found at several ancestral Puebloan sites, most controversially at Cowboy Wash in Colorado, where human remains showing cut marks, burning, and debone processing consistent with cannibalism were found alongside household debris. Researchers have debated whether this reflects ritual, starvation, or organized violence. Researchers who have examined this evidence have described it as genuinely difficult to explain within the accepted framework. These are not fringe commentators. They are credentialed academics publishing in mainstream journals, raising questions that the field has not yet satisfactorily answered. Then there is the matter of Mesa Verde's cliff dwellings, among the most spectacular architecture in North America, were occupied for less than a century before being abandoned around 1300 AD. The short occupation and the inaccessibility of the locations suggest the cliff face positions were chosen for defensive reasons, implying sustained threat from violence during the final period of occupation. What makes this particularly significant is its independence from the previous points. This is not a case of one theory requiring another. These are separate lines of evidence converging on the same uncomfortable conclusion. Adding to the enigma is this finding: oral histories of the Hopi, Zuni, and other Pueblo peoples describe the departure from ancestral homelands in terms of spiritual instruction. The people were directed to leave by spiritual authorities and to migrate to new locations as part of a prescribed ceremonial journey. These traditions preserve genuine cultural memory of the migration, even if they encode it in religious rather than historical language. This single data point, if taken in isolation, might be set aside. Anomalies happen, instruments malfunction, researchers make mistakes. But as we continue, you will see that this is not an isolated anomaly. It is part of a consistent and documented pattern. Equally puzzling to investigators, strontium isotope analysis of human remains from Pueblo Bonito has shown that some high-status individuals buried in the site came from distant regions, consistent with Chaco serving as a pilgrimage center drawing elite individuals from across the ancestral Puebloan world. Taken together, these facts form a pattern that cannot be explained by coincidence, misidentification, or methodological error. Each piece of evidence has been examined by skeptics. Each has been subjected to alternative explanations, and in each case, the alternative explanation falls short of accounting for everything that has been documented. We are left with a body of evidence that demands explanation and an accepted narrative that does not provide one. This is where serious inquiry begins. Now that we have established the evidence, we need to examine the theories that researchers have proposed to explain the Anasazi, North America's greatest mystery disappearance. This is where the debate becomes most intense, because the theories reflect not just different interpretations of the same evidence, but fundamentally different assumptions about what is possible and what the past looked like. Understanding these theories is not just an academic exercise. Each one has been championed by serious researchers with genuine credentials, and each one captures something that the others miss. The truth, if it is ever established, will likely draw on elements of several. The first major explanation proposed by researchers holds that a combination of prolonged drought and resulting resource depletion drove the abandonment of the Colorado Plateau. The tree ring record shows sustained drought conditions from the 1130s onward, and agricultural systems dependent on reliable rainfall would have been catastrophically stressed. Population pressure on a degraded landscape made continued occupation untenable, and the people moved to areas with more reliable water. This interpretation has significant academic support and is backed by substantial evidence, but it is not without problems. Critics point out that it requires assumptions that go beyond what the evidence strictly supports, and that key predictions of this theory have not been confirmed by subsequent research. It remains contested, and the contest is productive. A rival school of thought argues that social collapse driven by inequality and violence was the primary cause. Evidence of increasingly hierarchical social organization at Chaco, combined with evidence of interpersonal violence at multiple sites, suggests a society under severe internal stress. Drought may have been the trigger, but the fragility that made the collapse catastrophic was built into the social structure. This theory is controversial, and deliberately so. Its proponents argue that the evidence demands an explanation outside the conventional framework. Critics counter that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and that the evidence presented, while suggestive, does not yet meet that standard. The debate continues in peer-reviewed literature. Perhaps the most unconventional theory suggests that the abandonment was spiritually and culturally directed. A deliberate migration prescribed by religious authorities responding to prolonged drought as a sign that the people had violated their covenant with the land and needed to relocate and begin again. This interpretation, drawn from Pueblo oral traditions, does not contradict the environmental evidence, but adds a cultural dimension that purely materialist explanations miss. What is striking about this debate is not merely that experts disagree. That is normal and healthy in science. What is striking is the quality of the disagreement. Serious researchers, working from the same body of evidence, reaching genuinely different conclusions. That level of fundamental disagreement, when it persists over decades, is a signal that something important has not yet been understood. The question is not which of these theories is right. The question is whether any of them is right, or whether the truth is something that none of the current frameworks has yet been able to capture. The case surrounding the Anasazi, North America's greatest mystery disappearance, does not rest on speculation alone. What distinguishes this investigation from pure mythology is the existence of documented, physical, verifiable evidence, material that has been examined by credentialed researchers and whose authenticity is not seriously disputed. What is disputed is its interpretation. Let us review the most significant documented evidence as objectively as possible. We are not going to cherry-pick the data that supports a preferred conclusion. We are going to lay out what exists and let you draw your own assessment. Physical evidence supporting this account includes dendrochronology, tree ring dating, applied to construction timbers from ancestral Puebloan sites, provides one of the most precise archaeological timelines in North America, dating construction phases to within a year and documenting a prolonged drought beginning in the 1130s, followed by a severe drought from 1276 to 1299 AD, immediately preceding the final abandonment. This evidence has been subjected to independent verification. Skeptics have examined it. Alternative explanations have been proposed and tested. The data remains. The question of what it means remains open. Investigators have documented bioarchaeological analysis of skeletal remains from late ancestral Puebloan sites shows elevated rates of trauma, malnutrition markers, and inflammatory disease consistent with a population under severe environmental and social stress in the generations immediately preceding the abandonment. This evidence has been subjected to independent verification. Skeptics have examined it. Alternative explanations have been proposed and tested. The data remains. The question of what it means remains open. On-site analysis revealed the road network centered on Chaco Canyon, mapped by satellite imagery and ground survey, reveals an engineered infrastructure of regional significance that implies centralized political authority, an authority whose collapse would have made the maintenance of the entire regional system impossible. This evidence has been subjected to independent verification. Skeptics have examined it. Alternative explanations have been proposed and tested. The data remains. The question of what it means remains open. Each individual piece of evidence might, in principle, be explained away. A single anomalous artifact might be misidentified. A single anomalous date might reflect contamination. A single anomalous eyewitness account might reflect misperception. The question is whether all of the evidence can be explained away, and whether the explanations required are more or less plausible than the evidence itself. When multiple independent lines of inquiry converge on the same conclusion, that convergence is the most powerful signal in empirical science. And that is exactly what we are seeing here. We have examined the history, the evidence, and the theories surrounding the Anasazi, North America's greatest mystery disappearance. Now we need to ask the question that is sometimes overlooked in discussions of ancient mysteries. Why does this matter? What does it mean for us today? It would be easy to file this away as an interesting historical curiosity, a puzzle from a distant past with no bearing on our present lives. That would be a fundamental mistake. The questions raised by this case touch on issues that are directly relevant to who we are, where we came from, and what the human story actually looks like before the period covered by conventional history. The ancestral Puebloan story is more than an archaeological mystery. It is a case study in civilizational resilience and vulnerability, relevant today in a region facing similar pressures of drought, population growth, and resource stress. The descendants of the Anasazi, live today in the Pueblo communities of New Mexico and Arizona, maintaining cultural continuity with their ancestors. Their perspective on the abandonment as a spiritual migration rather than a collapse offers a framework for understanding cultural change that purely materialist archaeology sometimes misses. And the climate data embedded in the tree rings of Chaco Canyon's ancient timbers is now being read as a warning about what prolonged drought does to sophisticated societies that outgrow their water supply. Furthermore, the tools available to investigate these questions are advancing rapidly. Satellite imaging, ground-penetrating radar, ancient DNA analysis, isotopic tracing, and deep-sea sonar are all providing capabilities that previous generations of researchers could only dream of. Cases that were genuinely unresolvable 10 years ago are now open to new analysis, and the findings, consistently, are expanding rather than contracting the mystery. The investigation continues. New discoveries are being made. New analyses are being published. New voices are entering the conversation from disciplines that were not previously part of the discussion. The answers, when they come, and they will come, will not merely solve a historical puzzle. They will force a fundamental revision of assumptions that underpin our entire understanding of human history and human potential. We have now walked through the complete case of the Anasazi, North America's greatest mystery disappearance, from the historical record, through the physical evidence, across the competing theories, and into the modern significance of what remains unresolved. What the story of Anasazi ultimately reveals is not just a historical puzzle. It is a mirror. It reflects our assumptions back at us, our assumptions about what ancient people were capable of, about how knowledge is gained and lost across the centuries, and about the relationship between what we know and what we merely think we know. The evidence presented in this documentary is real. The questions it raises are genuine. The debate among researchers is ongoing, and that is healthy. Science is not a set of conclusions. It is a process. And the process requires that we remain open to evidence that challenges what we thought we knew, however uncomfortable that challenge might be. If you came to this documentary as a skeptic, we hope the evidence gave you something to think about. If you came as a true believer, we hope the critical examination gave you a more nuanced picture. The truth, as always, lies in the evidence, not in what we want to be true. Thank you for watching. If this investigation sparked your curiosity, please subscribe to the channel. We publish new documentaries every week, covering the full range of historical mysteries that the mainstream has not yet adequately explained. Leave a comment below telling us which case you want us to investigate next. The conversation continues. The investigation never ends.